G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're also having a fantastic, relaxing and productive weekend. Now legends, as always, of course we have a lot to go over. Of course we will look at the maps, we'll compare the maps and see where things are shifting and see why a movement somewhere will influence movements in other areas. Remember, war is its own then like organism. When you have protracted attritional war over a long period of time, a movement somewhere will influence somewhere else. We need to, of course, look at strikes that have occurred overnight. And so far, this ceasefire deal, if you don't know what it exactly is, well, trust me, you're not alone. I don't think that Zelensky, Putin and Trump 100% know what is going on at the moment. So far, it's been about as useful as on a bull. So we'll look over that, and in the last couple of videos I've talked about the specifics that would actually need to be implemented to make that happen, because these terms, infrastructure, energy, they are very, very wide. What is energy? It's oil, it's petroleum, it's power plants, it's nuclear power plants, it's thermal power plants, it's everything. So again, this hasn't yet been sorted out, and both Ukraine and Russia are definitely conducting strikes that would be outside of at least what the bones of that appear to be. We'll talk about the EU, we'll talk about NATO and Europe's part of NATO as well and what Trump has said, but also want to look at where they're changing things around. Of course, normally all 27 member states have to then agree on something for it to go through, but they don't like where Hungary is sitting. So they're doing the awfully democratic part of then just lowering that down to 26. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what I see as problems with having 100% anyway, but also where future issues then may arise. But where I want to start is I want to talk about Kursk and some information off the front line and where Ukraine has moved into Belgorod. Now, of course, we'll look here on the maps. This is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14, the red check and blue check, of course, Russia or Ukraine's movements. Very little of that on this map today, but let's come up here into Kursk. Now, there are claims that areas are surrounded. There are claims that areas are not. We see large amounts of geolocated destroyed equipment, especially down this MSR, the main service route or main supply route through between Sumy and Sudzha. Now, I've been sent this from a friend, someone I know, someone I've met both in Ukraine and outside of as well, and has sent me across this about the situation happening there. The situation in Sumy. Remember, Sumy is the Ukrainian side of the Kursk offensive. As of yesterday, the oblast is in lockdown. No civilian, no residents, no foreigners. I see the UN, that's it. And seeing the UN, that is bloody rare as anyway. There is no encirclement. Of course, Mr. President Donald Trump said that there was an encirclement in here. Now, what I have been saying is there is no physical encirclement. But when we look at the amount of geolocated strikes and the ability to pull in and out of here due to the ground's conditions, and there's only being a few roads, you could say that there is a tactical or strategic encirclement. Air assault, 80th, possible 95th, have the worst positions in tight pockets still in Russia. But that's our general's specialty in Ukraine. All regular brigades, like the 36th and the 1st Tank, has a solid line along the border at various points. Terrain is relatively flat there, although the SSO, the GUR, so these are intelligence and special forces style units sit within that, they're performing insurgent activities to success, I was told, at stabilisation. Yanikivka, around the MSR, that main service route of which we showed you, has been shit for a long time and is only getting worse. A lot of assets have been lost. Many guys have just walked out with what they could carry or on a truck. Lancets left them alone, of course, but MRAPs, etc. were getting smoked. Now, if you want a better idea, I think, of this, it's really worth going and watching History Legends' video on what occurred in Kursk. Now, even if you disagree or don't agree with him, he presents some fantastic information in there and geolocations and what then actually happened. I don't know what would happen now, but all the terrain I know, and the MSR to Sumy would be very, very difficult. Just like from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar in 22-23 via then Ivanivki, of course, the road of life or road of death. That was our advantage and their cost. We just had so much fire support tucked to the west side of the hills. So that's definitely our advantage. Not sure how such terrain plays out in the new age of drones. Of course, we have seen drones exponentially increase in efficiency, effectiveness, therefore lethality. I only know medical situation and what recons tell me from their experience. It's really not good. But the casualties is nowhere near the idea I'm getting from listening to Trump or you or elsewhere. Now, one thing I'll say in this is I have never given actual casualty figures or even what I believe the casualty figures in here would be. We can presume that thousands are still remaining around these areas just because that's what it would take to hold. Of course, we have heard a lot of others say that there could be thousands or tens of thousands then encircled in here, but what we look at, and primarily the one doing this is actually a military summary, is the geolocations of the vehicles and equipment getting hit on the border or into Sumy. My main point is that no one is trapped, but they should probably get the fuck out. Morale has been pretty shit for a while. Summer was fun. In January, my old commander and I had a coffee, and he said, "Why the hell are we here?" For someone like that to say that openly to me, well, you get an idea. Keep doing what you're doing, mate. Nafe would cut my balls off for saying this. I'm pretty sick of them. I've done, and I'm alive, and them again. So I think that's a good overview of what is occurring in Kursk. Some things just to get an idea of the morale, the situation, how people are feeling towards that, and maybe an idea of this MSR sitting through here. Of course, this is the Yanakivkia all the way through to Suja. And again, like we've said, with the deterioration of then the land out here down this road, you don't need to look very far to find that there are large losses along this road and still troops that are going to need to be using this. Now, where we need to move is just to the southeast of here, of where Ukraine has then crossed into Russia on a separate axis into, of course, the Belgorod Oblast. Of course, this is Kursk, we see this dotted line, and this is Belgorod. Now, it really came out of Turia into this area up in here. Now, this map shows no movement at the moment. So what we're going to do is then we're actually going to look then on the Syriac map. So you see Turia, as I showed you, and Marin out of here, and also to the south. You can see some significant change on this. On the 18th of March, the Ukrainian army launched a new offensive across the border into Russian Belgorod Oblast. Although the advance was halted, a small strip of Russian territory, about 7 square kilometres, remained under control of the Ukrainian forces. Over the next 3 days, the situation on the front has hardly changed, with the Russian army continuing to hold off Ukrainian attempts to seize the first localities in the oblast. As a result, the evacuation of civilians from Krasnaya and Yuruga Rayon was ordered. So the movement of civilians out of there. Now, what we have seen is an amount of equipment, notably then Bradleys and engineering vehicles, which typically sit on a tank hull, of course, with like a blade at the front, like a bulldozer. Crossed into here about 500 metres, 600 metres, at least by the geolocations that we reported on, although there was significant losses due to the drone activity here. Why this? Well, at the end of the day, war is almost holistic, acting like an organism. I believe, and I'll go back onto this map here, so this operated around this area here, was to try and relieve the situation just north of here in Suja, to try and draw some of the Russian drone crews down into here, and as well create then a bit of a diversionary force. And of course, as the ground is collapsing, that Ukraine hold of Russia's to maybe try and gain this, because we saw the costs that then Zelensky and Sursky were putting on how valuable this was at negotiation. They won't want to lose anything that is inside of Russia. Now, of course, we question the valuing of that land at a negotiation, but we can see that this has happened here, and I believe it is to try and relieve some of the pressure that is just slightly north of here. But we did see a significant amount of those vehicles getting taken out by drones, and very little actual man-to-man or armoured fighting. It was mostly armour v drone or v defensive lines. So this video has come out over the past, say, 24 or 48 hours of Kar-52s, Mi-28s. These are Russian attack helicopters, similarly to if you're familiar with Tigers or Apaches, okay? Heavily armoured, counter-rotating propellers is the best way to spot the Kar-52. Now, this was sent across from a guy behind the scenes taking out stuff in Belgorod. Look at the range. It's pretty much point blank for these choppers. Choppers clearly aren't worried about man pads, so then your man-portable air defence, or even at that range, the autocannons being the cannon on the front of the vehicle, one bit. It's like fast forwarded a little, but that's still stupidly close. Remember, these choppers can engage at very large ranges with things like LMURs, guided munitions, and pilot or whatever you'd call the second guy guided munitions. So these are vehicles, of course, that have crossed into very close range, given the range of these choppers. See this go off here, and then it's hit. Now, this may have been set up a little, but as this guy does say, this is basically point blank for helicopters like this. So this is a very interesting thing. You can see in this is where the Dragons conduct their defensive line, sitting at about, I believe, around about 500 metres with losses in there. And in my opinion, and you may call me a doomer, Ukraine cannot afford significant losses anywhere at the moment on the front line, especially into areas where you are not going to have the advantages that fighting in home terrain does have around logistics and supply. Hence why we see Kar-52s, Mi-28s working in this area and really not working that much in the east and maybe a little bit in the south. But he brings up a good point, that at that range, they're not that worried about man pads or even the autocannons on the vehicles. So let's have a quick look at strikes and then we'll jump back onto the maps. Of course, we saw the spectacular explosion of ammunition cooking off at the Engels 2 Air Force Base. Of course, one of the homes to Russia's strategic bomber fleet. And we have a better idea today. So what I'm going to bring up on one side of your screen, I'll say on the left, is angles of a satellite image before this and then after this. Now, these are taken at different times of the year, but we get what we get. So you can see there has been significant damage to where this ammo depot sits. You can spot where areas have blown up. Now, there's still a lot remaining here, of course. You can see the shockwave and fires that have headed out through then these buildings to the northeast of then this image. So you can see significant damage, still a lot more that has not been damaged here as well, including as well where areas then may actually be underground. There seems to be of no penetration of that. So we'll wait and see, but it does look like as far as these like buffers that get made of the spoil of dirt where then the ammunition sits within that have worked, as it hasn't spilled into some of the other areas, but still significant damage on that from Ukrainian long-range strategic drones. So overnight we saw Ukrainian drone strikes in Krasnodar, and of course an oil transfer terminal here absolutely on fire. Does an oil transfer terminal or an oil depot classify as energy? I would say yes, but I don't know yet what is going on with this deal. And in Zaporizhia, excuse me, we can see in this footage in the very beginning a number of Garand 2 strikes as well, with claims of 200 Russian drones flying into Ukraine last night. Now, what I will say is a ceasefire deal takes two to tango, but also if you want to win the informational space on this as well, especially in the US, well, you can't be saying, well, he did it, so I am doing it. Both Russia and Ukraine, if this deal looks like the bones that we have heard, are both sitting well outside of this at the moment, but you can't go, well, they have done this and we haven't. Neither side can say this at the moment. But let's look at what Trump says about this.
As Russia continues to attack Ukraine, are you planning to impose any sort of sanctions?
Well, they're fighting against each other.
So he pulls this up. She says Russia continues to attack Ukraine. He goes, well, they are fighting against each other. This gives us an idea, this language used about how Trump feels differently to the previous administration and to then the European administrations as well. They would not have reworded that question.
Yeah, I think we're going to have We have a ceasefire on a lot of areas, and so far that's all held very well.
We have a ceasefire on a lot of areas, and that is all held very well.
And
so, again, what areas does the ceasefire then cover? So this is what we don't know. We just don't know the inner workings. He said it's holding quite well. From the footage I'm seeing, it's not holding at all. It seems to have not even been a speed bump for these drones and missiles, but again, we don't know the inner workings. The way I've said, the only way I believe this could actually work is literally a list of areas that you are not allowed to target because of dual use. What is infrastructure? What is civilian? What is military infrastructure? Because if you house military soldiers in an apartment block, that is dual use. If you have oil, petroleum products, whatever, funding your economy, so therefore you can do the war, that is dual use. A bridge that has military trucks across it, that is dual use. It's what I've said. It gets very confusing, and I believe the only way is literally going to be a list or an area. And at this point in time, we see the ceasefire just really not working, and that is putting it lightly. So let's have a look back on the maps, and we'll move our way around a little bit, but we'll try and go north to south. So we'll start up in the north here. No changes shown on this map today. We open up then the Suryak maps, and Russian army recaptured some positions southwest of Fihilovka. So this is Fihilovka in here. There is some blue where Ukraine did push back, so there has been a recapture in here, at least to what Suryak maps says. But this is one of the areas I think we really need to keep an eye on, and tells us a lot about the situation with reserves. Now we'll continue moving our way down, and we get to Terney-Yampolivka front line, the Ivanivka front, and you can see a large Russian advancement here. Now, my personal opinion, this, let's say, is 4.8 kilometers at the extreme. My personal opinion is this did not happen in the past 24 hours. Either that or Suryak maps and AMK maps have a crystal ball, and if you could please tell me what's going to happen with the next round of chemotherapy on my brain tumor, please let me know. Or even better, tell me what the horses are going to run tomorrow at the track. But they've been reporting this movement for Suryak a couple of weeks. So we definitely can confirm there's definitely some movement around this area, and as well just to the south around Yampolivka as well, being confirmed by the deep state map here. Let's move our way down. Bilohorivka, no changes. Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, no change shown on this map today. But then let's have a look at the Suryak, and here's showing that just in the south here that there is further crossing. So not the easiest to see, but down in and around where this grey zone is sitting. Now, I haven't actually checked. Let's see, did this grey zone move? No, that grey zone has then been sitting there. So Suryak has said that the Russians have got more control out over some of the roads in there. We'll continue moving our way down. We'll get then into Toretsk. Now, this is an area which is very hard to know exactly what is going on at the moment. So take a breath and just wait out on any of these changes. Again, we see around this Kurdyamivkia area, see here, so right around here, we do see further changes shown by Suryak maps. Remember, he showed this area filling in yesterday, as well as just to the north of Gruzba as well. See this paddock in here, we're talking just in here, and some small movements we can see. Try and line up where these spoil piles is. So this spoil is right in here, just around this area as well. Again, very hard to know exactly what is going in Toretsk. One of my favorite things is going to become being a YouTuber that takes sources from a little bit of everywhere and trying to present multiple things, is going to be ones that don't do that at all and just believe, one side's fucking Kool-Aid being drunk, is where that border is actually sitting if a ceasefire comes into play. So of course we have then the Pokrovsk front, and just east of here we have what I refer to as the Badanivkia front, because I can't pronounce what Suryak maps refers to it as. So we'll have a look in here, and just a small movement. So we're lining up where this intersection is. We have Badanivkia, and just north of here towards Tarasivkia, that the Russians have entered the first houses here. So significantly further out than this map is showing. If he was to be correct in this, let's say here, about 2.5 kilometers further there. Now we have one last map update, and this is down in Lobkove. This area is where the maps are showing significantly different, but showing a lot of grey zone. So we have Lobkove, Stepove, and Mali Shebaki, and Shebaki itself. This is where Surek is saying there is a large presence of Russian forces. So let's open up this map here and have a look. So Lobkove sitting right here. The Russian army entered the southern part of Lobkove. You can see this red dot, that is Stepove, Lobkove. So this whole area, he's saying, is coming under occupation at this point in time, but just wait out on that. But as far as where maps haven't wanted to show changes, regardless of how much geolocations there are, has been in the south, especially areas where the 2023 counteroffensive failed to push through those lines. Robotne, Lobkove, and down until it was unable to be ignored, and it still was ignored by many, around Velika Novosilka. Remember, many still have not confirmed that this has come under control. So that's the ending of our mappings. And now I want to have a look into then the EU and what is occurring here as part of the political science part of the video. Now, rules that normally require all 27 EU countries to agree on a joint statement for it to be issued on behalf of the European Council were firmly in the crosshairs 2 weeks ago. A text agreed by the remaining 26 was appended to the other resolutions, which were unanimously agreed, while Hungary opted out. It was still issued as a formal European Council conclusion. So basically in this, that 27 can agree without Hungary there. We have seen bits and pieces done like this prior. Now, what I will say is, firstly, having 100% of agreement across anything is always going to be hard. But what I'll say is, if that's your law, that is the law. And it reminds me of this quote, I think so much of what we're seeing in the Western world at the moment. The death of democracy will not come by revolution, but the slow erosion of its principles dressed in the language of progress. Some of my spelling in that has been questionable. I don't know how I ended up writing that. Anyway, the statement on Ukraine today will be issued as an annex on behalf of the 26th. That this is the new normal. And when it is useful, when it comes to political intent, maybe down the line though, we will encounter other problems. So this is the new normal. The 26, we're going away from what we put out in the start. And again, that was put in the beginning for reasons too. But I'd say go even better one yet. Why not just have one ultimate power that can make then decisions? Hey, seems like Kim Jong-un can make things very, very quickly. And I think, as we see, it's dressed in the language of progress, and it's not going to come by revolution. It's a slow erosion of these principles. A top EU official said Hungary's objections are being priced in and quickly ignored. After March 6th, no one has any doubts that there was a divergence with one member state. The objective should always be to have conclusions at 27. If not possible, if the strategic division is maintained and we have all the indications that it is maintained, then we would move forward with 26. So you can see that there is a lot of changes being made in the EU. Some of this concerns me down the line. It's a short-term fix. I think long-term will deteriorate. Although tough wording, threatening additional sanctions on Russia's energy and trade goods might mean little, given actually implementing it at an EU level still does require unanimity. And Hungary has time and time again blocked these proposals, with an official saying Orban chose isolation and a path of illiberal democracy against the obvious interest of the EU. In fact, Hungary, he was given many opportunities and rejected extended hands. The security of Europe is too serious of an issue to negotiate with one person who sees things 180 degrees differently than everyone else. Now, Orban, he may be corrupt, he may be whatever, I don't care. He is still a democratically elected leader of a country practicing democracy. And he is no more illiberal than other states within the EU, but he's just not illiberal in the way that you want him to be. You're allowed to be illiberal left, you're not allowed to be illiberal right. And this is why I say these countries are practicing democracy, because what I have seen across the entire Western world, from America to Australia to Europe, is a practice of democracy. So many things recently are slipping into authoritarianism disguised as democratic or disguised as progress. Now, with this, that, well, he sees things differently to everyone else. It can be very important to listen to that person as well. It may not mean you agree with them, but you may want to go, why does that guy disagree with me? And what I've said here is if Putin listened to the one general in his room before the 24th of February who might have been going against the curve, his invasion may have gone a lot better. Now, of course, that is an invented scenario, but it seems like there were so many yes men of, yep, we will deploy far too few forces in, but Ukraine will collapse. If there was someone who stuck their hand up and went against the grain and said, look, have we considered the most dangerous course of action that this doesn't work, then just deny that off. Well, I think it's still important listening to someone who disagrees with you 180 degrees. I'm more than willing to do that with anyone. If you knew the amount of people I've reached out to in this community online to try and interview, people I vehemently disagree with, no one ever gets back to me. If he thinks he can do it better by going alone, I don't think many would try and stop him. Now, I would suggest the EU to be very, very careful with this, because they won't go out on their own. Hungary is not powerful enough in all aspects to do this. Russia will take this state into their orbit. And Europe has a right-wing movement at the moment. Look at the German elections recently. Potentially, it could swallow in more into Russia's orbit. Again, we need to look down the path here, not very short term, as we're very good at doing. A draft of the Ukrainian statement, seen by Politico, reaffirms the EU's continued and unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognised borders. The EU maintains its peace through strength approach, which requires Ukraine to be in the strongest possible position. So look, this war is not ending. Given this territorial integrity, internationally recognised borders, sovereignty, independence, peace through strength, where the US is sitting and signalling that we're a breath away from end of the war, we're nowhere near it with the EU stance here. And Ukraine is far closer to the EU stance than they are with America's. What I'll say is, well, you say the strongest possible position. How do we know when we're in that? Because I believe, we've actually probably missed the peak. That was the end of 22, beginning of 23. But is the strongest possible position right now, while you still have the US with sanctions, supplying arms, and the US is still interested? What if the strongest possible position is right now, and from here on, you may cross the event horizon and it will just deteriorate from here and end up in a worse position? And what I would ask the European leaders is, what are you actually doing to get into the strongest possible position? Because what I'll say is the European leaders, they love rhetoric. Macron, Starmer, they love rhetoric. I have yet to see any actions by these leaders that would actually indicate a position of power for Ukraine in the future. Now let's look at what Trump has said about NATO.
So NATO is solid, they're strong, but they have to treat us fairly.
Are we going to give up the...
Because look, without us, NATO is not the same.
So without the US, NATO is not the same. And he is 100% right. Around 80% of the firepower and all of the expeditionary force of NATO is the US.
And I can tell you, I've been having very good discussions, as you know, with President Zelensky and with President Putin. And President Putin will tell you that without the United States, he wouldn't be worried. But he is worried when the United States is involved.
Of course, Putin's worries about NATO. Well, if you're worried about a security alliance, you're going to be less worried if the part that has 80% of the firepower withdraws.
And I have to tell you, I've dealt very well with both gentlemen, and we have, I think we have the confines of a deal. I hope we have the confines of a deal. I'm doing it for two reasons. Number one, and by far most importantly, thousands of young people, and they're not American people, they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, are being killed every week, thousands a week.
So that thousands of young people are being killed. He says that NATO is strong, but again, I think we will see Russia and China really make moves around the chessboard to try and weaken the NATO alliance. And what I will say is, has this war strengthened or weakened NATO? And I think when we look at the cracks that have formed, the pressure put and the cracks forming where this pressure is very little, I think we could see movements. And what I said recently was, I think a opportunity has presented to further weaken NATO, and working with Trump to do that. And Trump there's a bit of me that thinks Trump is putting in these unrealistic expectations so he can actually withdraw out of NATO. And at the end of the day, if you get the US pulls out of NATO and then it falls on the lap of Germany, where does Germany then move as well? Where does the euro move? Again, we will see. Anyway, legends, a lot we went over today. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.